The document landed on the committee chair's desk at 6:47 a.m. on a cold January morning. Unmarked manila envelope, no return address, no stamps, just a small USB drive and a handwritten note in neat block capitals, the truth about Starmer Moscow, 2023. By 7:30 a.m., the chair had inserted the drive into his secure laptop and listened to the first audio file. His hands began shaking within 30 seconds. By 8:15 a.m., he had called the Speaker of the House of Commons on his private mobile. By 9 a.m., Westminster was plunged into absolute chaos as word spread through the corridors of power. By 10 a.m., an emergency parliamentary session had been convened with unprecedented speed and secrecy. By 11 a.m., the Prime Minister was being formally and urgently summoned to appear before the committee. This wasn't just another Westminster scandal. This wasn't expenses or affairs or leaked emails. This was something far more serious. This was potentially the complete destruction of a government, perhaps criminal prosecution, maybe even treason. The committee room was packed beyond any reasonable or safe capacity that morning. Journalists were crushed against the back and side walls, their equipment competing for space. Cameras were positioned at every conceivable angle, their lenses trained on the two chairs at the center. Security had been tripled throughout the building. Armed police stood in the corridors outside. The tension was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. Jeremy Clarkson sat at the witness table, perfectly still and composed. His arms were folded across his chest in his characteristic pose. His expression was carved from granite. He had spent the previous 3 hours listening to every single recording multiple times, reading every transcript with meticulous attention, examining every photograph with forensic detail and growing horror. If this material was genuine, and three separate independent verification laboratories insisted unequivocally that it was, then the British government was finished, done over. Across from Clarkson sat an empty leather chair, reserved, waiting, ominous in its vacancy, the chair for the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Keir Starmer was coming. He had no choice. The Speaker had made it absolutely and unambiguously clear. Attend this session voluntarily and immediately, or be compelled to attend by the full weight of parliamentary privilege and potentially held in contempt. There was no escape route, no exemption, no delay. The committee chair, a gray-haired veteran of 30 years in Parliament, cleared his throat repeatedly. His voice betrayed obvious nervousness despite his attempts at control. We are formally convened today for an extraordinary emergency session to examine allegations of the utmost possible severity concerning the Right Honorable Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. He paused, shuffling papers with trembling hands. These are allegations that, if substantiated through evidence, represent a fundamental and potentially catastrophic breach of national security, violation of public trust, and abandonment of the constitutional obligations inherent to high political office. The heavy oak door at the rear of the chamber suddenly swung open with a loud creak. Keir Starmer entered the room, flanked by 4 serious-looking security personnel and 3 expensive lawyers carrying thick briefcases. His face was ashen, almost gray in the harsh overhead lighting, but his jaw was set with visible determination. His eyes were hard and defensive. Dark circles suggested he hadn't slept. He walked directly to his designated seat, without acknowledging anyone present, without looking left or right, certainly without looking at Jeremy Clarkson. He sat down stiffly, his back ramrod straight. The committee chair continued in his formal, precise tone. Prime Minister, this committee has been provided with digital audio recordings, photographic evidence of concerning nature, and extensive supporting documentation. This material suggests that in March 2023, while you were serving as leader of His Majesty's most loyal opposition, you traveled secretly and without any official authorization to Moscow, Russian Federation. Audible gas erupted throughout the public gallery and press section. Furthermore, the chair continued, raising his voice slightly over the growing murmur. This evidence suggests that you met privately with Russian President Vladimir Putin and engaged in diplomatic discussions that allegedly directly contradicted your publicly stated positions regarding British military and financial support for Ukraine. The room absolutely exploded with noise, shouts of disbelief, accusations hurled across the aisle, expressions of shock and outrage. The chair grabbed his wooden gavel and banged it repeatedly on the sound block. Order! This committee absolutely will have order, or I will clear this chamber. It took nearly 2 full minutes to restore even marginal calm. When silence finally descended like a heavy blanket, the chair spoke again, his voice deliberately measured. Prime Minister, Before we proceed to examine the specific evidence in detail, do you wish to make any preliminary statement regarding these serious allegations? Starmer's voice was controlled and measured, but there was unmistakable tension beneath the surface. His media training was showing. Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, I categorically and completely deny engaging in any unauthorized, inappropriate, or improper diplomacy with the Russian government at any time. These documents you reference are sophisticated fabrications, almost certainly produced by hostile foreign intelligence services, designed specifically and deliberately to destabilize the democratically elected British government and undermine our continued strong support for Ukraine. His eyes swept the room with practiced authority. I will not be intimidated or deterred by transparent foreign disinformation campaigns, regardless of their apparent sophistication. Jeremy Clarkson leaned forward slightly in his chair. His voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority that somehow commanded instant attention. Play the first recording. Every head in the packed chamber turned simultaneously toward him. The committee chair hesitated visibly, clearly uncertain about procedure. Mr. Clarkson, perhaps we should first establish the provenance and play it, Clarkson repeated, his voice remaining quiet but now edged with steel. Let everyone in this room and everyone watching hear exactly what we're actually discussing here before we waste time with procedural delays. The chair looked profoundly uncertain for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly to the committee's technical officer stationed at the audio equipment. A moment of heavy anticipatory silence filled the room. Then a voice emerged from the speakers mounted throughout the chamber, crystal clear, professionally recorded, unmistakably recognizable to anyone who followed British politics. Unmistakably, the voice of Keir Starmer. I think we both understand the fundamental political reality operating here. Public support for Ukraine is absolutely necessary for domestic political reasons in Britain. The optics matter enormously to the electorate and media. But privately, speaking just between us, we both know perfectly well that the current military and financial situation is economically and strategically unsustainable for Britain over any extended timeline. Another voice responded, speaking English with a distinctive Russian accent. Deep, authoritative, unmistakably masculine. So you are saying explicitly that once Labour forms a government, you will systematically reduce this support? Starmer's voice responded with careful diplomatic phrasing. Not immediately, of course. That would be politically impossible given public sentiment. But pragmatism will necessarily and inevitably prevail over pure ideology. Britain simply cannot maintain current military expenditure levels indefinitely without serious economic consequences. There will be necessary adjustments to reflect fiscal realities. The recording ended abruptly. The silence that followed was absolutely total and profound. You could have heard the proverbial pin drop on the thick carpeted floor. Every single eye in the chamber was locked directly on Keir Starmer. His face had visibly transformed from pale gray to stark white. His knuckles were white where they gripped the edge of the heavy wooden table. That recording has been digitally doctored, he said, but his voice completely lacked its previous conviction. Modern artificial intelligence technology is capable of voice biometric analysis, confirms complete authenticity. Clarkson interrupted calmly, his tone almost conversational. He extracted a thick bound document from the folder in front of him and held it up for the room to see. 3 separate independent forensic laboratories conducted detailed analysis. University College London's Digital Forensics Research Center, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology Media Laboratory, the Israeli Defense Forces Elite Cyber Intelligence Division. He paused deliberately for emphasis. All 3 institutions independently confirm with statistical certainty that is definitively your voice, Prime Minister. No digital manipulation detected whatsoever. No artificial intelligence generation markers present. No voice synthesis artifacts. This is a completely genuine recording of you personally speaking those exact words. Starmer's jaw visibly clenched, muscles working. Deepfake technology and voice synthesis have advanced dramatically to the point where even highly sophisticated forensic analysis can potentially be fooled under certain circumstances. Clarkson finished the sentence. Absolutely correct, which is precisely why we commissioned 3 completely separate laboratories using entirely different analytical methodologies to ensure reliability. He ticked them off on his fingers. Voice print spectral analysis, linguistic pattern matching algorithms, phonetic microstructure examination, background acoustic environment authentication. He looked directly at Starmer with unwavering eye contact. It's you, Prime Minister? Speaking those exact words. to Vladimir Putin in Moscow in March 2023. The room erupted into absolute pandemonium again, even louder than before. Conservative MPs surging to their feet, many shouting accusations and demands, Labor MPs looking genuinely shocked, confused, some appearing betrayed, SNP members demanding immediate explanations and investigations, Liberal Democrat members calling for transparency and accountability. The committee chair banged his gavel so hard and repeatedly that the sound echoed like rapid gunfire. Order! I demand order in this chamber immediately! It took nearly 5 full minutes of sustained gaveling and shouted demands this time, when some semblance of grudging calm was finally restored through sheer authoritarian force. A senior conservative member stood formally, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. Prime Minister, I will ask you a direct and simple question that requires only a direct and simple answer. Were you physically present in Moscow, Russian Federation, at any point during the month of March 2023? Yes or no? Starmer's eyes flickered sideways toward his legal team. One of the expensive lawyers leaned in close to whisper urgently in his ear. I undertook travel to several different European capitals during that general time period for various consultations on foreign policy matters. Moscow. The conservative MP interrupted with sharp precision. Moscow specifically and explicitly. Not Paris, not Berlin, not Brussels. Moscow. Yes or no, Prime Minister? The pause stretched uncomfortably. The silence became oppressive. My travel schedule during that period included, there were some unofficial consultations undertaken in my capacity as opposition leader that Moscow. Prime Minister, yes or no, answer the question. Starmer's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Yes. Absolute pandemonium erupted instantly. Complete and total chaos consumed the chamber, MPs leaping to their feet from all parties, many shouting simultaneously. Journalists frantically typing and broadcasting, camera flashes creating a strobe effect, security personnel moving nervously toward potential conflict points. Jeremy Clarkson sat absolutely motionless throughout the chaos, watching Keir Starmer with steady, unwavering, penetrating focus. The committee chair banged his gavel continuously until his arm visibly ached. It took nearly 10 full minutes to restore even marginal order this time. When the room finally achieved some semblance of grudging quiet, Clarkson spoke. His voice was quiet, but somehow cut through all remaining noise like a surgical blade through flesh. You lied, Prime Minister? Starmer's head snapped toward him with visible anger. I engaged in exploratory back-channel, diplomatic outreach, which is entirely, you lied, Clarkson repeated with absolute certainty, each word deliberate and weighted. You secretly traveled to Moscow and met with Vladimir Putin. This occurred while Russian military forces were actively massacring Ukrainian civilians in their homes, while British-supplied weapons were being desperately used to defend Ukrainian cities, while British taxpayers were funding massive humanitarian aid operations. He paused to let each point sink in. You flew to Moscow and sat across from the man personally ordering those massacres. And you told him that British support was essentially just performative optics, that it was economically unsustainable, that there would be inevitable adjustments once you achieved power. Starmer's expression hardened defensively, his political training taking over. That represents a gross, deliberate, and completely unfair mischaracterization of complex diplomatic. Does it? Clarkson challenged directly. He nodded once to the technical officer. A second audio recording began playing through the speakers. Vladimir Putin's voice, speaking in accented but clear English, and the British military assistance program to the Kiev regime. This will genuinely continue under a future Labour government. Starmer's response came through absolutely clearly. Publicly and for media consumption, yes, absolutely. The optics remain critically important politically, especially given the current American administration's position. But speaking frankly between us, Vladimir, there are very real practical limits to what can be realistically sustained both economically and politically over time. The British public's appetite for extended involvement in this conflict is demonstrably not unlimited. Putin's voice responded with what sounded almost like subtle amusement. So you understand and accept our fundamental position then? Our legitimate perspective on these matters? Starmer's voice measured and diplomatic. I understand realpolitik, Vladimir. I understand that genuinely sustainable long-term solutions necessarily require pragmatic accommodation of all parties, legitimate security interests, and concerns. The recording ended with an audible click. The silence was somehow even heavier and more oppressive this time. Damning, absolute, inescapable, devastating. Clarkson spoke directly into that crushing silence. Realpolitik, pragmatic accommodation. Legitimate security interests, those were your exact words. Prime Minister, spoken directly to Vladimir Putin. He leaned forward in his chair. This conversation occurred while Ukrainian children were being bombed in their schools by Russian missiles, while maternity hospitals were being deliberately targeted as military objectives, while documented war crimes were being systematically committed and recorded daily by international observers. His voice somehow grew even colder and harder. You sat directly across a conference table from the man personally ordering those documented atrocities, and you calmly discussed pragmatic accommodation of legitimate security interests. Starmer stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. This is clearly and obviously a deliberate setup. This is Russian intelligence services attempting to destabilize. Then why did you go at all? Clarkson's voice cut through like ice. Starmer froze mid-sentence, mouth still open. Answer that question honestly, Prime Minister. Why did you personally travel to Moscow? Why agree to meet with Vladimir Putin in complete secrecy? Starmer's mouth opened and closed twice before words emerged. I was attempting to establish viable back-channel diplomatic communications that could potentially facilitate. Without informing the sitting Prime Minister, Clarkson interrupted, methodically counting points on his fingers. Without Foreign Office knowledge, oversight, or authorization. Without MI6 consultation or security clearance. Without informing your own shadow cabinet colleagues. Without notifying Parliament through any official channels whatsoever. He dropped his hand back to the table. That's not diplomacy, Prime Minister. That's not establishing channels. That's freelancing foreign policy, or it's conspiracy against the state, or potentially it constitutes treason under British law. The room erupted yet again into chaos.